to hold you tight.
The words float like a whisper in the dark, haunting, vulnerable, unforgettable. There are some voices that don't just sing. They ache, they plead, they heal. And Luther Vandross had one of those voices. He wasn't just the soundtrack of a generation. He was the sound of love at its most complicated, the joy, the loss, the longing. From wedding first dances to tear-streaked late nights alone, his velvet tone followed us like a memory we didn't want to forget. But behind the smooth vocals and polished performances was a man carrying his own heartache, a shy genius hiding in plain sight, navigating fame, personal loss, and unspoken truths, all while pouring every ounce of himself into the music. How did Luther Vandross go from a quiet dreamer in the Bronx to becoming the king of quiet storm? What battles did he fight behind the curtain? And what was the price of being everyone's favorite love song, but still longing for one of his own? This is the story of Luther Vandross, the man, the mystery, and the music that never let go. If you love uncovering the real stories behind the voices that shaped music history, hit that subscribe button and join us here on Retro Waves, where legends live on. Long before the world knew his name, before the Grammys, the platinum records, and the sold-out tours, there was just a little boy named Luther Ronzoni Vandross, growing up in a modest apartment in the Bronx, New York. He was the youngest of 4 children in a tight-knit working-class family. His father, an upholsterer by trade and a quiet soul, passed away when Luther was only 8 years old. That loss would cast a long shadow, one that echoed in his music for decades to come. His mother, Mary Ida, became the rock of the family, instilling in her children discipline, dignity, and an unshakable belief in the power of dreams. Music was everywhere in the Vandross household, not just on the radio, though gospel, jazz, and doo-wop filled the air, but in the family itself. Luther's sister, Patricia, once sang with a group that performed on the Apollo. His older siblings played records late into the night, giving young Luther an unofficial education in vocal phrasing, harmony, and soul. He didn't just listen to the voices of Aretha, Dionne Warwick, and Marvin Gaye. He studied them, absorbed them, lived them. By the time he was a teenager, Luther wasn't just mimicking, he was creating. He wrote his first songs, formed his own singing groups, and would often practice in front of a mirror, imagining himself on stage. It wasn't about fame, not yet. It was about expression, about finding something pure in the middle of a complicated world. Still, Luther was shy. He didn't chase the spotlight like other kids might. He carried himself with a quiet intensity, a young man already aware that vulnerability was both his gift and his armor. After graduating from William Howard Taft High School, he enrolled at Western Michigan University, but music tugged at his spirit more than any classroom could. He left college after just 1 year to pursue his passion full-time, a decision that would lead him on a winding, often uncertain road toward greatness. Because even for someone as gifted as Luther Vandross, the path to the top wasn't paved in gold. It was paved in backup vocals, disappointments, and the long silence before anyone truly heard him. Before the spotlight found him, Luther Vandross was already everywhere. You just didn't know it. Throughout the 1970s, his voice was hidden in plain sight, tucked behind some of the biggest artists and hits of the era. He was the voice behind the voice, a background vocalist for legends like David Bowie, Roberta Flack, Bette Midler, Chaka Khan, Barbra Streisand, Carly Simon, and Donna Summer. You can even hear him on Bowie's Young Americans album, that lush, gospel-tinged sound.
Heard the news today, oh boy. I got it, sweet. You got the beat.
That was Luther. He arranged the backing vocals for the track Fascination, and his influence quietly shifted the song's entire soul. And yet, for all the brilliance he was lending to others, his own path felt stalled. He formed and disbanded groups, most notably Luther, a funk band that released 2 albums in the mid-70s. The music was strong, his vocals unmistakable, but the records barely made a ripple. Epic Records dropped the group, and the albums were quietly shelved. To make matters worse, Luther had to buy back the rights to the songs himself, just to prevent them from being reissued without his consent later. He was broke, frustrated, brilliant, and still unseen. There were moments when giving up must have felt like the easier road, but Luther never stopped writing, never stopped singing. He poured himself into jingle work to make ends meet, lending his voice to commercials for brands like Juicy Fruit Gum.
A view from a mile in the sky, and there's nothing like the flavor of Juicy Fruit Gum.
And Kentucky Fried Chicken. Even there, his voice carried a soulfulness that made you stop and listen. A voice like his couldn't stay in the background forever. Then came Change, the Italian-American disco group that, in 1980, gave Luther his first real taste of the spotlight. He was asked to sing on 2 of their tracks, Searching and The Glow of Love.
As we share our fair talking in the glow of love.
When those songs hit, something shifted. The Glow of Love became a dance floor hit internationally, and Luther's performance was undeniable. Fans began to ask, who is this man? The industry started to wonder, why hasn't he released a solo album yet? For Luther, it wasn't just about waiting his turn. It was about earning it, on his terms, with his sound, and his heart fully in the music. And finally, in 1981, after years of singing in the background, Luther Vandross stepped into the center of the stage. What came next would change the sound of love songs forever. When Luther finally released his debut solo album, Never Too Much, in 1981, it wasn't just a hit, it was a statement. The title track shot up the charts, earned Grammy nominations, and announced his arrival with that signature smoothness only he could deliver.
Days in your arms is never too much.
But with success came pressure, and with fame came isolation. As the 1980s unfolded, Luther became the go-to voice of romance. Album after album, hit after hit, Forever, For Always, For Love, Busybody, The Night I Fell in Love, Give Me the Reason. He redefined modern R&B balladry. His voice dripped with elegance, his arrangements were lush and sophisticated, and his concerts were like sermons for the soul. But behind that silky falsetto and carefully polished public image, Luther was struggling. He was a perfectionist, obsessed with every detail, every arrangement, every breath. He once canceled a tour because he didn't think the band sounded right during rehearsals. It wasn't ego, it was fear. Fear of being less than excellent, of being exposed. And then came the whispers. Whispers about his sexuality, unspoken questions that followed him throughout his career. Luther never publicly addressed them, and the media, for the most part, tiptoed around the topic. Some fans speculated, others defended his right to privacy. Industry insiders quietly admired how he navigated it all, how he managed to bare his soul through lyrics while never revealing the most guarded parts of himself. But that silence, it came at a cost. In a world where love songs often double as confessions, Luther lived a life where he gave everyone love, but held his own tightly in the shadows. Some say that inner conflict added even more depth to his performances, that the ache in his voice came from lived experience, from loving deeply but quietly, from years of hiding in plain sight. Whether those rumors were true or not, one thing was clear. Luther carried a loneliness that few people understood, and then came the physical toll. By the early 90s, Luther's weight, something he'd battled his entire adult life, became both a tabloid headline and a deeply personal war. He'd lose 100 pounds, only to gain it back. He once told Oprah, "Food is comfort, food is love." But it was also a burden. His image was often used against him in cruel ways, even as his voice remained flawless. Through it all, he kept singing, kept performing, kept loving his audience in the only way he knew how. But even the strongest voices can only carry so much pain before something cracks. In 1991, 10 years after his debut, Luther Vandross released Power of Love, and with it, a title track that felt like time itself had paused.
When you're close, I can feel the power when it's love.
The power of love, love power, fused gospel, R&B, and pop into an anthem that was both uplifting and deeply soulful. A reminder of what he had always done best: make love sound like salvation. The album earned him 2 Grammy Awards, cementing his place not just as a singer, but as the voice of a generation. And for a moment, everything felt aligned. The world was finally celebrating him the way he deserved, not just as a background vocalist, not just as a balladeer, but as an artist of substance, of spirit, and of soul. But his most career-defining moment didn't come with a new sound. It came with a song from the past. In 2003, Luther released Dance with My Father, a song so personal, so piercing, that it seemed to break through every emotional wall.
To dance with my father again.
Co-written with Richard Marx, the song was a tribute to Luther's late father, a man whose absence had been a quiet wound for decades. The lyrics were simple, but the ache behind them was seismic. It became a global hit. It won the Grammy for Song of the Year, and it touched millions of fans who saw their own grief reflected in his voice. For many, Dance with My Father wasn't just a song, it was a memory, a prayer, a goodbye. And for Luther, it was a moment of full-circle artistry, a son reaching back in time to find peace and giving the world a piece of his soul in the process. By now, Luther wasn't just famous. He was beloved. He had sold over 25 million records. His voice was instantly recognizable, often imitated but never duplicated. He became the benchmark, the velvet standard, for male vocalists in R&B, soul, and beyond. His phrasing, breath control, and emotion were studied by legends and newcomers alike. Whitney Houston once said she admired his tone more than almost anyone. Mariah Carey called him a dream collaborator. Even Beyoncé, early in her career, pointed to Luther as one of the greats she aspired to emulate. And it wasn't just fellow artists. Fans all over the world felt like they knew him, or rather, like he knew them. His songs were played at weddings, funerals, graduations, and every moment in between. He didn't need tabloid headlines or flashy reinventions. Luther stayed true to himself, always favoring class over spectacle, soul over trends. But even at the height of his fame, the weight of his private battles still lingered. Despite writing and singing some of the most romantic songs of all time, Luther never married. He had no public relationships, no confirmed long-term partner. His personal life remained a mystery, not because he didn't love deeply, but because he loved quietly. Friends described him as gentle, funny, introspective. He adored his mother, Mary Ida, and often credited her for his resilience. When she passed away in 2003, it devastated him. She had been his anchor for decades, his biggest fan and fiercest protector. Without her, Luther seemed to drift, emotionally, physically, spiritually. There were rumors, of course. Speculation about his sexuality had followed him for years. Some fans believed he was gay, others said he was simply private. Luther never addressed the questions. He once said, "If you don't know me by now, you will never, never, never know me." And perhaps that was his choice, to keep the deepest parts of himself sacred. But it left fans with an ache. How could someone who gave us so much love not have someone to share his own with? Maybe that was the price of being everyone's soundtrack, of singing the words others couldn't say. Maybe his great love was the music itself. In April 2003, just months after Dance with My Father was released, Luther suffered a massive stroke that left him in a coma for nearly 2 months. The world held its breath. For a while, he fought hard, relearning speech, working through physical therapy, holding on to the hope of returning to the stage. But he would never fully recover. On July 1st, 2005, Luther Vandross passed away at the age of 54. The cause was complications from a heart attack compounded by years of health struggles. The world mourned. Tributes poured in from every corner of the music industry. Fans lit candles. Radio stations played his songs in quiet reverence. For days, it felt like the whole world had gone silent, just to listen to him one more time. But in truth, Luther never left us. His voice still plays on late-night radios. His lyrics still echo through empty rooms. His songs are still the soundtrack to our most tender memories. Luther Vandross didn't just sing about love. He was love, complicated, graceful, aching, eternal. So now we turn to you. What's your favorite Luther Vandross song or memory? Was it a first dance? A heartbreak anthem? A song you and your parents used to sing in the car? Tell us in the comments, because these memories are how legends live on. And if you believe in honoring the voices that gave us so much, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay close. Here on Retro Waves, we remember the stories, the souls, and the songs that time could never erase. Until next time, keep listening, keep feeling, and keep the legends alive.